What I think is at stake in this election that we're facing, the election is already underway. Early voting started yesterday. Why your voice is so important, and maybe a little bit of the nuts and bolts of how you can be involved and how you can make sure your voice is heard. And maybe a little bit of a perspective of what it's like as a Black woman to run for a statewide office in this state, which is what I'm trying to do. So let me start first with why did I become a civil rights attorney? So I grew up in a mixed-race family. My father's Black, my mother's white. And when they met in the state of Missouri and many other states, it was illegal for them to be married. So they moved out to Washington State where legally they could be married. But that experience and many others taught me how important it is that we have people who are working for equal justice under the law through the legal system. So I was the first one in my family to go to college. I was able to go to law school and come to North Carolina and do civil rights work. So what did that mean? It meant that I was going to communities across the state and to places where some of the clients that I had, this is 30 years ago now, some of the clients that I had were the same people who, during the civil rights movement in the 60s, had sat in at their local library so that Black people in that county could check out books, or they had sat in at the lunch counters, or the civil rights movement, we learn about those big seminal moments, but I think what we don't realize is that across the South, in community after community after community, there was organization, there was protest, there was advocacy, throughout that time. So I was coming in at the very tail end of, and connecting with some of those folks, and what I was doing was filing lawsuits so that the county commission and the Board of Education and other local governing bodies that had never had an African American on them could have representation. And sometimes I would go to a county that is as much as 30 or 40% Black, and they had no Black representatives. So that was the first part of my career. And that has continued, that advocacy around voting rights has continued, including fighting back against, you might have heard about the monster vote suppression law that ended same-day registration, it cut back early voting, it ended pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds, and ultimately, through that lawsuit, a federal court ruled that the North Carolina legislature, in passing that law, discriminated against African American voters in this state with surgical precision. So this is in 2013. The North Carolina General Assembly is intentionally discriminating against Black voters in this state, trying to make sure that they don't have access to the ballot. And so this effort is really two-pronged. They want to keep people from having a ballot, and then if you do vote, they want to suppress the strength of your voting power. And so we worked on litigation that demonstrated that both the House districts in the state, the congressional districts, the state Senate districts, were all racially gerrymandered in order to keep your votes from counting equally. So now, in 2018, we have for the first time a little bit more fair legislative districts and House districts. And so we actually have contested races in every single House and Senate district across the state, which has not happened in recent time. So why am I running for the Supreme Court? What I understand from what's happened at our national level since November of 2016 is that our U.S. Supreme Court is not likely to be a favorable forum for the enforcement of our civil rights. Right? And our state constitutions, on the other hand, are a strong source of protection of civil rights. And so it seemed really important to me to have people on our state Supreme Court who are committed to the right to vote, to a fair and impartial court, and who will treat everyone equally under the law. So that's why I'm running. And what do we face in this election? I'm running statewide, which means every vote in every county counts the same. There's no districts for this seat. There's only one Supreme Court seat on the ballot, and the General Assembly has passed 5 separate laws trying to impact the outcome of this election. And they made it partisan, they eliminated the primary, they passed a law making sure that my name would be at the bottom of the 3 names on the ballot. They passed a law putting this office in the middle of the ballot. They're hoping that voters will vote at the top of the ballot and then just get bored or get tired or be in a rush and never get down to the Supreme Court race. And when you think in the past, a statewide Supreme Court race would have been at the top of the ballot.
Right.
So
Should have been.
what has it been like running as a woman of color? As soon as I announced, the North Carolina Republican Party put up a website, they sent out flyers, they called me Dangerous Anita Earls, they tweeted out that innocent human life people will die if I'm elected, was what they said. They darkened my feature in this flyer. They did, if you've heard of the Willie Horton ads, they did Willie Horton times 18. They put pictures of 18 people labeled rapists and murderers and suggested that those people I had defended and that they got out again and that they killed people after that. None of that is true. I didn't represent those 18 people. I'm not responsible for them being released or not released. But this is the kind of tactic that has been used against me. I think we'll see more of that in the next couple of weeks. And we've learned, my campaign has tried to wage a positive campaign. We put out an ad on YouTube saying who I am, why I'm running, what I've done in my 30 years of my career. And I've learned tonight that the Republican Party has filed a complaint against me, saying I violated the law by putting that ad out. So I have a huge hurdle ahead of me, and I need all of your help. So that's why I'm here. I want you to know what you're facing. So let me ask you this question. I have such great respect for you. I imagine that you may already know all the nuts and bolts of, if you want to vote, how to make that happen. But let me see your raise of hands. Would it be helpful if I go over a little bit of that? Sure. I see a few nods. Okay. So as students, you have the right to vote either at where you go to school, because you are a resident here, or if you want to maintain your permanent residence at home, you can vote at home, assuming that home is in North Carolina. If you want to vote here and you have not changed your voter registration, or if you've never been registered, you must use early voting. It is too late to register now under the paper registration form. So by using early voting, in this county, there are numerous early voting sites. So you go to that early voting site, you take some official proof of your residence. So whether that's a driver's license or a bank statement or a student, you can use student, right, you can use a student document, but you take something that proves your residence, and you go to one of those early voting sites. Early voting, like I said, started yesterday, and it continues pretty much until the Saturday before November 6th, the Tuesday voting day. So until Saturday, November 3rd, almost every day you can vote early vote. The hours differ in every county, so I don't know this county off the top of my head, but that's all on the website, the Board of Elections website. But you can register and vote all at once. Now, but you have to do that during early voting. If you wait until election day, you won't be able to re-register. Now, if you are a resident here and you already are registered here, then you can vote on election day. And I would urge you to check your voter registration. But I would also say, as an attorney who's done voting rights work, early voting is the absolute best way to go, because the vote suppression efforts, intimidating people at the polls, challenging voters as not being eligible, all of that is easier to do on election day. It's a lot harder to do it over all the days of early voting. So you're much less likely to face any long lines or any harassment, I would say, at the polling place if you use early voting. If you want to vote in your home county, say that you are at school here, but you're actually from Durham and you want to vote for those Durham candidates. You can use early voting in Durham, so you can go home and vote at any of the early voting sites, or you can go in person on election day, but you have to go to Durham. You can't vote here if you're registered in Durham. Or you can write in and ask for an absentee ballot. But I would encourage you to try to do one of the in-person voting, because for the absentee ballot, it has to be mailed before election day, so you have to send your application, then they send back the ballot, then you send in the ballot. I don't know about you, snail mail not so happy. I would urge you to consider voting in person and taking 5 friends with you. And as I said, you have the choice to vote either here in this county or in the county that you live in if you're from North Carolina. So, do people have questions for me about how you vote?
I don't have a question, but I would like to say something. Thank you for being here. Listen, Bennett Bell. Let me just tell you. You heard Attorney Earls talk about all the things that you would have to do. You are on this campus for 4, 5, I don't know how many years. And while you're here, you should make sure that you're going to make an impact on this community that's impacting your college. Now, we had the first African-American mayor elected in Greensboro. And she was elected because Bennett Bell's, Dawn Johnson, she's a Bennett Bell, but she was elected because Bennett Bell's went out and launched their votes to get her elected. We have known over these many years that this campus has not only a history of voting and voting well, but making a difference in this community. I can tell you, 85–90% of the students will never go back home to live. And Tuesday, November the 6th, that's a class day. So you're gonna be in class. That's where you should be after you go vote. So I'm just urging you to, if you have a voter registration card for another county, a lot of these students are not from North Carolina. They're from other places. And if you don't know when you have to get your absentee ballot in, how you get it, listen, voting in this county, having a voter registration card for North Carolina for registering in Guilford County, you get your schools here, your city council, you can impact what they do, you can impact what your school board does, and everything else. So it makes sense for you to cast your ballot here. Unless you're gonna go home early on the weekend and vote early. And as she has said, if you're not registered, you can't vote. If you don't vote, you're not counted, and if you're not counted, we're not gonna be heard. So we wanna be heard. We want to resist, okay? We wanna resist all of the ugliness that's going on, not only in the U.S. Congress, but in the North Carolina House and the North Carolina Senate. They will determine who your Congress people are. We have 13 U.S. House districts right now, 13 members of Congress, 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats, yet our state is about 50-50. Now that ought to tell you something, that gerrymandering and the drawing of those lines, we don't need another General Assembly having a crayon or pencil or anything else redrawing these lines. So we're gonna have to straighten that out for you, Senator, so you can have some help. But I would encourage each and every one of you, if you are not registered to vote in Guilford County, you can do that during early vote. And they're not gonna hassle you. Just take your ID with you. And make sure that we can make a difference, not only for this community, but for this state. Now, this African-American woman is running, and you know, we saw the screening of this black woman who put her life on the line. Anita Earls has put her life on the line for all of us. She was the civil rights attorney for the NAACP and has done all of the other things to make sure that we have the rights that we have, but they are slowly being taken away. So this is a truly, you can't vote for Alma Adams anymore unless you live in Charlotte. You can vote for me. So I'm not here asking you to vote for me. but I'm asking you to vote for me, and that's what I would do. Because if you have a voter registration card and you wake up on November the 7th and you forgot to vote, or you forgot to get your absentee from wherever else it was, and this is what I would tell my students, and none of the students I taught are still here, I'd say, you know what, if you have a voter registration card, if you are a registered voter and you don't vote, you're worse than the person who's not registered. Matter of fact, you wouldn't be in my class. But anyway, again, I'm as passionate about this as Sherelle Barber was when she stood here and talked about this mission that she's on. We've got to make a difference in North Carolina. Everything's at stake. Your education, your voting rights, absolutely everything. Healthcare, everything is at stake. This is a critical election. And Bennett Bells, you have set the record across the state. You're a small institution, but you brought big votes, and we need to do that again. Now, Congressman Lewis, John Lewis, got his head beat in going across Pettus Bridge so that we could have the right to vote. He'll be on this campus tomorrow. And I'm going to spend the night so that I can join my colleague, and I'm going to tell you the same thing. If you're not registered, you can't vote. If you don't vote, you won't be counted. Somebody's going to make a decision for and about us most times without us. So you know what you need to do? You need to get in on the inside, run for office, as I've done, as she's doing, as the senator has done, and make those decisions from the inside out. Or you need to be able to control those of us who make those decisions on your behalf. And I can tell you, when good people don't go to the polls to vote for good people, bad people get elected. And they do bad things to good people. That's what's going on right now. That's enough preaching for the night, but I'm done.
So my advice is that there's all sorts of paths, right? So it's not like there's a single right major or a single right extracurricular activity or a single right graduate school or even a single right office to run for first. But what I would say is that you do have to put yourself forward, right? So one thing, and I say this from research, the American Constitution Society looked at why is it that there are so few women judges, and one reason is that when the call comes out that we need there's a judicial vacancy, a whole bunch of men raise their hand, and women don't. And that's even true now. Now I think the legal profession is a little bit unique. You should know it was only this year, for the first time, that the Harvard Law School entering class had parity in terms of male and female students. When I went to Yale Law School, women were about a third of the class. So you have to be ready to put yourself forward and not be shy. Don't hold back. Don't wait for somebody to call you up and say, you know, we really, really want you to do this and you would be really, really great. No, know your own strength. Know your own power. Never underestimate your own power, and chart for yourself your own course. And when you step forward, you will be amazed at the people who will come along to step forward with you and support you and guide you and give you the tools you need. That's my advice. Let's see, back in the back.
Hi, my name is Zoe James. I'm an English major from New Haven, Connecticut, Yale. I have a question regarding to women's health. Dealing with the Me Too movement, and after just watching that amazing documentary, what would you do as Supreme Court candidate to pass judicial regulations against women not having access to health care?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So as a judge, we don't make policy. And of course, as a candidate, as a judicial candidate, because we are bound by judicial ethics to be fair and impartial, I'm not predicting how I would rule in any particular case. But what I can tell you is that in other states, their state Supreme Courts have found protection for women's access to reproductive health care services in their state constitution. So Iowa, the Supreme Court of Iowa, said that a 72-hour waiting period in that state was a violation of the women's state constitutional right to privacy, and they struck down the law. So women in Iowa right now don't have to worry about what the U.S. Supreme Court might do. They have protections in their state constitution. I can also tell you that I've been endorsed by Planned Parenthood and NARAL, and I have represented Planned Parenthood in litigation in the past. So that's my record, and that's what has happened in other states. This way.
Hi. My name is Jasmine Jones. I'm from Elizabethtown, North Carolina, interdisciplinary studies major. I'm a sophomore. I want to know, what could you encourage me, because I want to be a Supreme Court judge. That's my dream job. What could you encourage me to go through the path? I've been struggling, changing my mind, but that's what I always say.
So I would say that I benefited greatly actually from I was off 3 years between college and law school. And during that time I had a fellowship to travel abroad. I went to Tanzania and Italy. And then I was studying women's role in cooperative work organizations. And then I worked in a solicitor's office and a law firm. And while that meant I was a little bit older than my colleagues at Yale, in fact, I was married by the time I went to law school. I was pregnant my first term. So I had a child while I was in law school. But that time in between gave me life experience and knowledge that I brought to bear when I was in law school. So the cases and what I was reading and what I was studying was more meaningful to me. That's just my personal path. Many people go straight from college to law school and do just fine. I think the other thing that what I saw in my colleagues were the people who went to law school with a clear sense of purpose did so much better. The people who were there just because, well, I don't know what else to do, I'll try law school, didn't have the commitment and ability to focus and care about their studies. And then I would also encourage you to not be daunted by the cost of law school. As I said, I was a mom. I put myself through law school. I came out of law school owing over $100,000 in loans, and I still went to work for a civil rights firm. And I paid those off over 10 years. And so my point to you is, you can do it. Now that was 30 years ago, so that might not sound like a whole lot of money. It might be a lot more now. But my point is just, don't be deterred by the money, because you can do it. And you can pursue your goal of ultimately being a justice. There are some really great programs and stories and books written about some of the first. So I went to a program in Washington, D.C. about the first African-American justices on state Supreme Courts. And there's only a few, but there was one woman. And so I also find inspiration from that, from reading their stories and their paths. Is that answer your question? Yes.
I'm sorry. So how did you determine what exactly you wanted to practice? I do plan on going to law school as well, and I have so many different things that I'm passionate about. I know there's so many different things that that need to be, worked on as a lawyer. How did you determine, okay, civil rights is the first thing that I will focus on as an attorney?
Well, again, 30 years ago, for me, there's a basic question of who was I gonna represent. Most of my classmates were going to places where they were going to represent big businesses or governmental interests. And so very early on, I decided I'm going to represent people who otherwise can't afford to have an attorney. That was like my basic criteria. And then after that, whether I was doing poverty law or civil rights law or immigration law, seemed less you know, I could find my path. And I also thought that criminal defense work was really important because of the mass incarceration that even then was beginning in our society, and that the people who were most in need of the best lawyers were the people who were incarcerated unjustly or you know, not getting good legal advice. And I actually did a lot of criminal defense work in the first 10 years of my career. So I didn't have to narrow early on. I did a wide range of types of cases in private practice. And I landed on voting rights because that was where I could represent communities, and I could really see where you could change the structure of the local government. You were actually, you know, changing institutions and putting in place people who could go on to influence policy, whether it's education or healthcare or employment. All those things are decided by school boards and county commissions. So that's why I ended up doing voting rights work. But I guess my suggestion to you is, early on in your career, you can explore multiple areas and then determine kind of where your passion is, what gets you most excited, as long as you know what your commitment is in terms of whose interests in this society are you going to be representing. Yes.
I have a process question for you. So when the election ends and you win the spot, will it be difficult to switch over to the job of doing a position where you are kind of expected to call things down the middle, even when you might have to go against some of the interests of the people who worked for you to get elected?
So I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the question. I think that my job as a judge is to apply the law. It's not to make the law. So I don't get to make policy. I have to apply the law as it's written. And I have to apply the law fairly and equally to everyone who comes before the court. That's the only way you ever get equal justice under the law. But I don't see that. That means that, you know, 50% of the time I should rule for one party and 50% of the time I should rule for another party. That's not what it's about. It's about looking at the facts of each case and applying the law fairly. And if that means 90% of the time these folks lose, that's because that's how the law applies to the facts in their case. I think that there is also an important role at the Supreme Court level. It's the court of last resort for all sorts of state law issues. Everything from how much money are we going to spend on education in this state? The state Supreme Court made a decision that vouchers were constitutional under our state constitution, allowing money to be taken out of private education systems and paid to private schools. Out of public education into private schools. So there is a duty, I think, of when you're a justice, to understand the intent and the purpose of our state constitution and to be true to that. And that's, you know, no matter which political party wants you to rule which way. And ultimately your duty and your responsibility is to the Constitution and to the voters of the state as a whole, right? So I have been in roles where I've had to, so a lot of my career has been as an advocate, right? When I represent a client, under the rules of professional ethics, it's my job to do my absolute best for that client. And in many ways, the only difference between me and attorneys who represent corporations, who also have the duty to do the best for their client, is who I've been representing. So all of us attorneys who do litigation, who represent clients, we are all advocates doing the best we can for our clients. The difference when you are a judge is that you no longer are the advocate, you're the one making the decision about how the law applies to the facts. And I was on the State Board of Elections for 2.5 years. I was in that role. I was not an advocate for anybody. I was deciding how do campaign finance laws apply to our elections. When I was a Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Justice Department, it was my job to enforce civil rights laws. And sometimes other parts of the administration, the Department of Transportation or the Department of Education, wanted to do something. I wanted to carry out a policy. And it was my job to say, you know what, you're actually encroaching on our civil rights laws when you try to do that. So there have been times when I've had the opportunity, the good fortune in my career, to be in a role where my job is to apply the law to this decision maker. And so it's a different role, but I don't see it as a you know, I have to be 50-50 on each side. Yes, ma'am.
Are you free, speaking of the state constitution, are you free to talk about the amendments that are proposed?
So there are 6 constitutional amendments on your ballot. I'm not going to express a personal opinion on 5 of them because if they're passed, it's my duty to enforce them. The one I can give you a personal opinion on, or my perspective on, is the one that deals with the administration of justice. And that's the amendment that's the longest one on the ballot, the most confusing, and would change who appoints judges when there is a vacancy. Right now, the governor appoints, and the person who's appointed must run at the very next election. The amendment would change that to allow the legislature to appoint and allow the person to stay in office for 2 years and then run. The part of the purpose behind that is a court packing plan that the Republican Party would like to see me lose, then that amendment pass, then they will go into session on November 27th. They have the power under the Constitution to increase the court to 9, to appoint 2 vacancies, and to flip the court to 5 Republicans and 4 Democrats. So I think that's not what our Constitution designed. Our state Constitution says that voters should elect who sits on the courts, and I oppose that amendment for that reason. As a point of public information, I can tell you that the position of the Democratic Party is to oppose all 6 amendments. The Republican Party says vote yes on all 6. And 5 former governors, Democrats and Republicans, as well as now 6 former justices of the North Carolina Supreme Court, have come out against the 2 amendments that would alter the balance of power within the state government. So the amendment I just talked about on judicial vacancies and the amendment on the State Board of Elections. They've said those are not good for our state, the way our government is set up. We should have separation of powers, balance of powers, so that one branch of government doesn't get too powerful. There is a lot of information about the amendments online. Democracy North Carolina, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, has a website with an extensive fact sheet on the amendments if you want more detail about the positions on both sides.
That's it. I think we can take one more question and then
Well, my name is Wesley Morris, and I just want to say that I really honor these Black women's spaces, and I thank you for allowing me to make one comment. And I make this as an individual who's been in this community for a number of years, and I don't often get the opportunity to speak as an individual because of other roles that I have. But I know the work of Anita Earls, and I just want to say that I value this conversation so much because you're here, and how much your transformative vision has touched my life. And I know that as a benefit to others that are here in this room, because we may have had the benefit of college and other experiences of achievement, but there are many in our families that have not, and I've seen you touch their lives and change their lives. And so I thank you for your vision and the work that you continue to do. And I also want to thank Sherelle for the marvelous documentary that you presented to us tonight as a gift and a benefit to Marielle and to all of those lives that are touched there. But we need more people like you that are not only well qualified and adept at the law, but have a heart that is so sincere and so well beyond any kind of cordoned off room. You are somebody that I think lives in a world that I hope that we can get to. And I really thank you for taking the time tonight, both of you.
I want to take the opportunity as state senator to thank Anita for the work she's done and to thank you for receiving her because it's important that we see other Black women who are aspiring and who are doing things, and you see what you are expected to do, to be. I'm not saying can be, I'm saying are expected. You are expected to move where Anita and Alma and I and the others and Sherelle have gone. So we want to thank you for that. Thank you, Sherelle, and I'll turn it back over to Dr. Johnson. Thank you, Dr. Dawkins, as well, for entertaining tomorrow. You're going to announce tomorrow. Event. But I'll take a partisan side and say I'm on the ballot too.
remind everyone that tomorrow from 3 to 5, there'll be a rally and organizational activity here on the campus. Congressman John Lewis will be here, and Kathy Manning, who is running for Congress, will also be here.
I'll be here.
And G.K. Butterfield.
Oh, and G.K. Butterfield, who represents
Congresswoman Adams will be here.
and Congressman
And
Adams
the
will
same
be here.
thing, we're gonna get you down to register and vote.
You already heard the speech, so.
It's really important that students are attending these events and that you actually, it's not just important that we are registered to vote and that we're going to vote, but we actually know who's on the ballot.
That's right.
Know who you're voting for. So I am really pushing for everyone to tell their sisters, tell your roommates, everyone. Please make sure you're at these events and you know who you're voting for. We have voter guides in the cafeteria before lunch, before dinner. Make sure you're grabbing when you're actually reading them and seeing who you're voting for. Okay? Love y'all.
So now for our action item for us, to give the message back to Brazil and internationally, we want to take a photo.
Yes.
We will get direction as well.
Yeah, so we are getting one of the photos that has, so the photos out in the lobby, they were taken the day after everything happened at a vigil that happened in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. We want to take a picture around this photo that says Marielle Presente, and we're going to put that on our social media. I'm going to send it to my family in Brazil because we want them to know that Bennett Bells see them and honor their struggle and honor their legacy. So if we can come up here, gather around that. If there's snacks outside,
You all can come on down. We will all fit.